Rome was never destroyed by foreign armies, not by barbarians, not by kings, not by distant empires. Rome's most dangerous enemy was always itself. The Battle of Pharsalus was not fought for land or gold or survival against an external threat. It was fought for power, for control, for the right to decide what Rome would become. This was not a battle between Romans and strangers. This was Romans facing Romans, wearing the same armor, using the same weapons, praying to the same gods. Only the names were different. On one side stood a man adored by the people, feared by the Senate, and trusted by his soldiers beyond reason, Julius Caesar. On the other stood a man once hailed as Rome's savior, the Senate's champion, and the symbol of republican authority, Pompey Magnus. Both had served Rome, both had defended it, and now both were ready to tear it apart. This is what makes Pharsalus different. No matter who won, Rome would lose something it could never fully recover. The morning before the battle was heavy with tension. No triumphant speeches, no heroic certainty, only silence. The kind of silence that exists when men understand they are about to cross a line from which there is no return. Caesar knew it, Pompey knew it, and deep down every soldier standing in formation knew it too. If Caesar won, Rome would no longer belong to the Senate. If Pompey won, Rome would no longer belong to its most brilliant general. Either way, the Republic would bleed. This war began long before the first sword was drawn. It began the moment Rome grew too powerful for its own traditions, when generals returned from conquest with loyal armies and personal ambition. Caesar was not the cause of this war, he was its consequence. Pompey was not defending peace, he was defending a system already cracking under its own weight. Pharsalus was simply the moment when those cracks finally split open. Two Roman armies stood on Greek soil, ready to destroy each other for the future of a city that had conquered the world, but could not conquer itself. This was not a battle for victory, it was a battle for identity, and Rome would never be the same again. Rome did not collapse into civil war overnight. It drifted there, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, as power grew larger than the traditions designed to contain it. For centuries, the Roman Republic had survived because no single man was meant to be greater than the state itself. Authority was divided, power was temporary, ambition was restrained, at least in theory. But Rome was no longer a small republic defending its borders. It had become a world power, and world powers break old rules. As Rome conquered distant lands, it also created something far more dangerous than foreign enemies. Generals who commanded absolute loyalty from armies that no longer fought for the Senate, but for the man who paid them, fed them, and led them to victory. This was the world that produced Julius Caesar. Caesar did not rise because he was reckless. He rose because he understood Rome better than Rome understood itself. Through the Gallic Wars, he transformed from politician into legend, from senator into commander, from servant of the Republic into a figure the Republic could no longer control. His soldiers did not follow him because they feared punishment. They followed him because they trusted him with their lives, and because he shared their hardships, their hunger, and their blood. To the Senate, this loyalty was terrifying, because Rome had learned a hard truth. Armies loyal to individuals are more dangerous than armies loyal to states. Standing opposite Caesar was Pompey Magnus, once Rome's greatest hero, once the man who had cleared the seas of pirates and expanded Rome's reach eastward. Pompey had once been Caesar's ally. Together they had dominated Roman politics. But power does not like to be shared for long. As Caesar's victories multiplied, Pompey's position weakened. The Senate, fearing Caesar's popularity more than Pompey's ambition, chose sides. Not because Pompey was perfect, but because he was predictable. Caesar was not. When Caesar's term ended and the Senate demanded he disband his army and return as a private citizen, They were not enforcing law. They were testing whether Rome still controlled its generals. Caesar understood the trap immediately. To return without his army was not to return peacefully, it was to return vulnerable. And vulnerability in Roman politics meant destruction. So Caesar made a choice that no Roman general before him had dared to make. He crossed the Rubicon. It was not a dramatic gesture in the moment. No armies clashed, no cities burned, but every Roman understood what it meant. The law had been broken. The boundary between civilian rule and military power had vanished. From that moment forward, compromise was impossible. Pompey fled Rome with the Senate, believing that time and numbers were on his side. He had more legions, more resources, more political legitimacy, but Caesar had momentum, and momentum is often stronger than law. The civil war that followed was not fueled by ideology alone. It was fueled by fear. The Senate feared Caesar would become king. Caesar feared the Senate would destroy him. Pompey feared losing relevance in a Rome that no longer needed him. Each side claimed to defend the Republic. In reality, the Republic had already begun to dissolve. By the time both armies met near Pharsalus, Rome had already crossed its point of no return. The battle itself would decide who ruled. But it would not decide what Rome was anymore. That decision had been made years earlier. The moment Rome allowed its generals to become greater than its laws. Pharsalus was not the cause of Rome's transformation. It was the proof that the transformation was complete. The plains of Pharsalus were wide, open, and unforgiving. A landscape that offered no shelter, no forests for ambush, no narrow passes where cunning could easily replace numbers. This was ground chosen not by genius, but by confidence. Here, on the soil of Thessaly, two Roman armies prepared to decide the future of Rome under an open sky that would witness Romans killing Romans. On one side stood the forces of Pompey Magnus. They were larger, they were better supplied, and most importantly, they believed time itself was on their side. Pompey commanded seasoned legions from the eastern provinces, supported by a massive and confident cavalry force that stretched across his flanks like a living wall. Senators watched from nearby hills, certain they were about to witness the restoration of order, the final defeat of a man they considered too dangerous to be allowed back into Rome. Pompey's strategy was simple and on paper flawless. He would hold the line, let Caesar attack, let Caesar exhaust himself against superior numbers, and then, when the moment was right, his cavalry would sweep around the enemy and crush the smaller army from behind. Across the plain stood Julius Caesar with an army that looked inadequate by comparison. His legions were fewer, his cavalry weaker, his supplies strained by constant movement and pursuit. But what Caesar lacked in numbers, he compensated for with cohesion. These men were not strangers to one another. They had marched together for years through Gaul. They had starved together. They had survived winters, sieges, and hopeless odds. They trusted their commander, not because the Senate ordered them to, but because he had never abandoned them. Caesar studied the battlefield in silence. He knew this was not a fight he could win through force alone. Against Pompey's cavalry, a traditional formation would collapse. So he reshaped the battlefield before the first blow was struck. Behind his main infantry line, Caesar positioned an unusual reserve, a hidden fourth line composed of experienced veterans trained not to throw their spears, but to fight at close range with discipline and restraint. This decision would define the battle. As the armies aligned, the symmetry was haunting. Same armor, same shields, same battle cries, spoken in the same language. There was no hatred on the field, only tension. Men looked across the plain and saw reflections of themselves. Some recognized old comrades, others recognized former commanders. This was not a clash of cultures, it was a fracture within one. The silence before the advance was heavier than fear. No horns sounded at first, no sudden rush forward. Both sides understood the weight of the moment. Pompey waited. He believed Caesar would have to move first. He believed patience would win the day. Caesar waited too, not because he hesitated, but because he wanted Pompey to commit to a plan Caesar already understood. When the order finally came, the ground trembled under synchronized movement. Roman shields rose, Roman standards advanced, and in that moment, as the distance between them closed, the Republic of Rome, as it had once existed, stood on the edge of extinction. Pharsalus was not yet a battle. It was a confrontation between two ideas of Rome, one clinging to tradition through control, the other reshaping tradition through loyalty. Only one would survive. Caesar understood something long before the battle began, something Pompey, despite all his experience, failed to fully grasp. This fight would not be decided by numbers. It would not be decided by reputation, and it would certainly not be decided by tradition. It would be decided by adaptation. Standing on the plains of Pharsalus, Julius Caesar did not see an enemy army. He saw a plan. He saw Pompey's confidence in cavalry. He saw the Senate's belief that size equaled legitimacy. And most importantly, he saw predictability. Pompey believed that Caesar would be forced into attack, that hunger, pressure, and inferiority would push him forward recklessly, that Roman discipline alone would not survive a cavalry encirclement. Caesar agreed with only one part of that assessment. His army could not survive a traditional cavalry collapse, so he refused to fight traditionally. Instead of strengthening his front line, Caesar strengthened his future. Behind his main infantry, he formed a hidden reserve, a fourth line composed of his most disciplined veterans, men who had fought beside him for years and no longer needed shouted commands to act. These soldiers were instructed not to throw their spears, not to chase glory, but to wait, to hold, to endure, to strike only when the moment revealed itself. This decision was not dramatic. There was no grand speech, no heroic gesture. But it was the most important choice Caesar made that day. When Pompey's cavalry finally charged, it did exactly what Caesar expected. Fast, confident, overwhelming. Caesar's weaker cavalry bent under pressure and began to give way. To Pompey's observers, this looked like the beginning of victory. But Caesar was not watching the retreat. He was watching the distance. At precisely the right moment, he unleashed his hidden line, not forward, but upward. The veterans raised their spears and aimed not at shields or horses, but at faces. This was not brutality, it was calculation. Pompey's cavalry, trained for sweeping maneuvers, not close quarters discipline, hesitated. Horses reared, formations broke, confidence evaporated. Within moments, the unstoppable force became uncontrollable movement. And in warfare, loss of control is the beginning of defeat. As Pompey's cavalry collapsed, Caesar did not pursue recklessly. He advanced, slowly, relentlessly, as if the battle were unfolding exactly as planned. His infantry, still intact, pressed forward with renewed certainty, while Pompey's center, now exposed, felt the weight of a mistake it could no longer correct. This was not genius in the theatrical sense. It was genius rooted in restraint. Caesar did not outfight Pompey, he outthought him. He turned Pompey's greatest strength into the battle's most fragile point. And as the lines closed, as Roman met Roman under identical banners, the outcome became inevitable. Pharsalus was not won in the clash of swords. It was won in the quiet moment when Caesar chose preparation over pride and patience over force. This is why Caesar's mind mattered more than his army, because intelligence does not need superiority. It needs timing, and on that day, timing belonged to Caesar. Every great battle has a moment that history remembers, not because it is loud, but because it is irreversible. At Pharsalus, that moment did not arrive with a roar. It arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, as decisions made minutes earlier began to reveal their consequences. Pompey was still waiting. From his position behind the lines, he expected Caesar's army to break first, to tire, to lose cohesion, to collapse under pressure. What he did not expect was silence. Caesar's legions did not rush forward in desperation. They did not charge blindly into Pompey's superior center. They advanced slowly, methodically, as if the chaos unfolding around them was irrelevant. This was the first sign. On the flanks, Pompey's cavalry, once so confident, had vanished from the fight, leaving behind open ground and a growing sense of unease. Pompey's infantry felt it immediately. A Roman soldier knows when something is wrong, even before it can be explained. The rhythm changes, the noise shifts, orders stop arriving, men begin to look sideways instead of forward. Caesar saw this hesitation and understood that the battle had entered its most fragile phase. He gave the order to advance, not as a charge, but as pressure. Roman shields moved forward in unison, not fast, not slow, just enough to remove hope of recovery. Pompey's center now faced a terrible reality. They were fighting without protection on their flanks, without cavalry support, and without clear direction. Still, they held. These were Roman soldiers, trained, disciplined, proud. But discipline cannot survive uncertainty forever. The breaking point came when Pompey made his final mistake. He did nothing. Believing the situation could still be stabilized, he waited for a reversal that would never come. And in warfare, waiting at the wrong moment is worse than retreat. Caesar did not wait. He reinforced his pressure, feeding fresh units into the fight while Pompey's exhausted infantry had nothing left to give. The line began to bend, not collapse, bend. And that distinction matters, because once a line bends, every soldier feels it. The man on the left senses movement. The man on the right feels space opening. Suddenly the shield no longer protects the shoulder. The formation no longer breathes as one. This is when fear enters. Not panic, but realization. Pompey's soldiers understood that the battle was slipping away, not because they were weaker, but because they were alone. Across the field, Caesar watched without celebration, without urgency. He knew the moment had passed. What remained was not victory, but completion. The Republic's armies were no longer fighting for Rome. They were fighting for survival, and survival is never enough to win a civil war. At Pharsalus, the battle did not end in a single dramatic collapse. It unraveled quietly, relentlessly, until resistance became meaningless. This was the moment Rome's fate changed. Not when swords met, but when belief disappeared. Pharsalus did not decide who was right. It decided who would rule. Rome survived the battle, but lost itself forever. Sometimes the greatest victories are the most tragic.